Welcome to the Rinkside Rundown podcast, your ultimate destination for all things women's hockey with your host, Chris Sinclair, a proud member of the Hockey Podcast Network. Hello and welcome back to the Rinkside Rundown podcast. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to hearing. I'm joined by friend of the show and former guest, Taylor Cook, as we will be bringing you a monthly segment that's centered around all things mental health and performance to ensure you're getting all of your absolute best out of sports. Taylor, welcome back to the show. I'm really excited to be able to do this and dive a little bit into, well, your world. How are you doing?
Great to be back. I really enjoyed our last conversation here on the podcast, and I absolutely love what you're doing with the show and making sure that like the voices of the female athletes and specifically the hockey world are being amplified and being able to share their stories and their learnings. And I feel like there's just so much to be able to learn and take from those stories too. Like there's a lot more value than we necessarily give credit to, especially in your own perspective and your own experience. You're not thinking about how much value those stories actually hold. So I think it's really great that you're taking the time to celebrate and to amplify those voices.
Well, now I am blushing, so that's great news. And I appreciate the kind words. But you are also one of those voices. And I think that it's really unique to be able to speak with someone who not only has the professional experience, but also has now transitioned to mental performance and being a coach in that space. And I think now more than ever, it's really important for us to be able to speak about that. I think broadly speak about mental health, mental performance pressure. We all experience it regardless of what career or what job we have. But you actually are very uniquely positioned to be able to speak about that at a very specific kind of way. And I think that's why one of the many reasons why I'm incredibly excited. You know, as you mentioned, our first episode together, it was an incredible experience to be able to connect with you, to be able to talk about your story, you know, your background, what got you into hockey. But I think now this is a great opportunity for us to be able to highlight the incredible next career that you have or that you've developed, which is as a mental performance coach. And I think when we, you know, before we get into the questions that our great community has shared with us, I think this is a great opportunity for us to be able to speak a little bit more about your, what inspired you to get into the mental performance coach space or the mental performance space. And what is it actually like? What's the process to become certified?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of a different journey, I'll say, specifically in my case, mainly because, you know, my father, he was bipolar when I was growing up. So I was exposed to the world of mental health and a lot of the stereotypes that come with it from a very young age. And I actually experienced the reality of those things. So hearing what a stereotype is for people who are bipolar versus actually experiencing it, very, very different things. People think that it's just like up and down every single day. And for some people, certainly that is the case. However, in the case of my dad, it was like months at a time. So it was like going in manic highs for up to 3 months and then quickly followed by a very, very deep low where like oftentimes he was sent to the hospital because you just could not really predict what he was going to do in that deep state of depression for that period of time. So he was like on medication and stuff like this to keep those chemicals balanced up here. But of course, like sometimes there's lapses in judgment where you're thinking that everything's great and you don't want to take pills anymore. And then you have to go through that whole cycle again. And honestly, it's pretty draining for everybody in the family too. And he was a guy who had his own business. So I saw how everything from a mental health standpoint impacted every area of his life, from personal to business to family, and just how important that actually is. So I don't think I really give necessarily enough credit to that experience from when I was younger all the time. But when I'm sitting here now looking back, I know just how important that whole piece was in shaping my experience with mental health from an outside perspective looking in. Um, and then, yeah, I think, he was a huge Tony Robbins guy. He loved to talk mindset and just how important like those aspects are. Especially, he would come at it from like a business perspective. And when I was younger, I was like, "Oh, here we go again. Like he's preaching the same things that he always does. Like every kid, like you don't really think about those things, you know. But looking back, I think they were really important lessons that he was teaching me without me actually being aware that I was being taught some of those lessons, which is, again, also part of that journey too. So it was just kind of like planting the seeds of experience and some interest and those things from a young age. But then it was when I got into junior, I got really exposed more to like the mental side of the game, how that impacted my performance was like I just rocketed once I had all of these great resources to be able to utilize finally. And then transitioning into university, had planned to go in for psychology. The way they test in psychology, your girl can't do it. I can't just go and do like 100 multiple choice. It's just not how I perform at my best per se. So I ended up going into political science and environmental studies instead, which yeah, interesting 5 years of going through that whole process of like essays and whatever. But basically, yeah, I got to the point where I ended up playing overseas professionally. I was actually in Norway at the time and still playing. And one of my friends who I was speaking with said, like, you should definitely go and talk to this person about mental performance. Like, they can provide you with some really great strategies and tools. And so I went through this program, and it really opened my eyes to how much was being left on the table from me as an athlete. Like, there's so much more that I could be doing, but I'm not going about doing it the right way. And so going through that program really opened my eyes to the power of just how impactful those things can be. And then inspired me to actually get into the coaching space myself. And so I kind of started to build like a coaching career in tandem with my athlete career already, because I knew like I knew that I wasn't going to end up continuing to play past my 30s. Like I just didn't see that being my reality, which is totally okay. But I just wanted to be prepared for a second career and to be in a career that I loved just as much as I love hockey. And so that's kind of what sparked the interest in mental performance and has maintained to this point. But yeah, like the certification process, to get back to your question, was pretty interesting actually. It was all done virtually, so it was going through like a lot of the core values and going through a lot of the like philosophical things, and also like understanding what it is to actually be a mental coach rather than like a sports coach, for example. But it's based on soft skills, and soft skills take much longer to develop, I think, especially if you're not so intuitive with some of those things. But yeah, it was a really great process. And I was really happy to be able to do that while still playing, because not only was I able to apply a lot of those strategies to my own performance, but yeah, I think it was just like simultaneously preparing for my next career, which was honestly the best thing that I've done.
And what I find unique about your story is that, I mean, obviously you did both of those things as you shared simultaneously, but at the same time, you've now found this new space, and it was a very organic, very real. It wasn't you felt like you had to do this thing. You were drawn to the mental performance aspect of I guess we could call it sports psychology. I guess that's really what it is, right? And the fact that
Mhm.
you were able to do that so organically is, I think, makes you as a coach much more genuine, much more authentic, and someone that your clients can connect more easily with.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I hear from athletes all the time, actually, is it's sometimes difficult for them to relate to like a sports psychologist, for example, especially if they don't have any sort of experience in the sport or in sport in general, because it's one thing to, of course, have the educational background, and it's nothing to take away from sports psychologists. They're super effective too, but everybody learns and connects differently. And I think that also plays a really important role here. And so some athletes have a really difficult time to connect with someone who has no experience in what it means and what it takes to be an elite level athlete, where you have these really high pressure situations and you have a lot of expectations that are not only placed on you from others, but some things that you're also placing on yourself too, because you have such high standards of yourself. And so I think that's one of my greatest strengths in this area, is that I've gone through this experience. And so it makes me more relatable to the athletes that I'm working with, because when they explain something to me, I can easily pull something from my memory bank and say, yeah, I totally understand what you mean, because I also experienced this when I was around your age or when I was in a similar situation. And to be able to kind of talk them through, okay, like what happened in my experience? How was I able to work through some of those things? And also on top of this, here are a few tools that you could benefit from and are going to help you work through whatever the obstacle is that you're currently facing too.
Yeah, and I think that's incredible, and I would just like to highlight for you as well as all the listeners that just I can attest to how easy it is to connect with you. You are very approachable, very open, very honest, and it's been a delight to be able to chat with you. So I can only imagine how important that is, and how much how much your clients appreciate all of those aspects of your personality. So I can attest to it. Not that you needed it, but I can attest to it. So it's absolutely accurate. So absolutely. And I think that it's also important, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think it's also important to discuss just a little bit about, if you're an athlete, how do you even really connect with someone as specific as yourself in mental performance? How do you connect with a coach, a mental performance coach? And what does that coaching, I know it's going to be a little bit tailored, no pun intended, but it's going to be tailored to that individual. But what does it kind of look like in terms of coaching for when it comes to mental performance?
Yeah, great question. And when you say connect, I assume you mean like on a personal level with the coach and the athlete that you're working with. And that is honestly quite literally the foundation of everything, because if you don't have a great rapport or a great like connection with the athlete that you're working with, it can be really difficult to get in deep on some of those pockets where you have to do more of that work and you have to be somewhat vulnerable to work through those things. Because vulnerability, as much as athletes in particular have a very common viewpoint of it being a weakness, it's actually one of your greatest strengths, because the more open you are about some of these things, especially in a relationship where you're working with a coach, the more you're going to get out of it at the end of the day. Because when I'm vulnerable with an athlete, or even as an athlete, when I was an athlete, being vulnerable with a coach and sharing how I'm feeling, you're letting them know, okay, what's going well and where are some deficits that might need to have a little bit more attention, where they can actually support you further. Because if we don't know what the problem is, we can't solve it. And your coach doesn't read minds and they want to help you. I would say like 99% of coaches just want to help. So to your question, like when it comes to connecting with the coach, and whether that's with your own like sports coach for your team, whether that's working with a mental performance coach or a sports psychologist, I think it's just about having the base foundation, like trust, first of all, knowing that you're in a safe place. That's big. You have to feel like psychologically safe too, knowing that everything we talk about is confidential. I'm not going to be going to your coach and talking to your coach about these things, about anything that you're saying, nothing like that. But this is a safe place for you to open up and share what's going on upstairs. By upstairs, I mean mentally, of course, because that's where the roadblocks come in. And that's where we're going to be able to kind of highlight some of the areas that maybe you're not already aware of, because we don't work on mental skills as athletes, or as athletes should be, the way that we work on our physical skills.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by Durant Barristers. Durant Barristers is a proud supporter of women's sports and is an inaugural sponsor of the Rinkside Rundown podcast. Durant Barristers provides legal services for athletes, coaches, officials, administrators, and sports associations of all sizes, from minor associations to national sports organizations and professional sports environments. We routinely assist with safe sport complaints, investigations, anti-doping, harassment, discrimination, abuse, and governance matters. We also provide representation on general civil litigation matters, including employment and business disputes of all sizes. Durant Barristers founder Aaron Durant also provides mediation and arbitration services to assist in managing disputes in a timely and affordable manner. Durant Barristers has generously offered their best ever discount to fans and supporters of women's hockey. Mention the Rinkside Rundown podcast to, wait for it, receive 15% off all your accounts with Durant Barristers for the duration of your relationship with the firm. To learn more about Durant Barristers, visit www.durantbarristers.com. That's www.durantbarristers.com. Thank you to Durant Barristers for sponsoring this episode.
And now, back to the show.
Let's get into some of those questions that our wonderful audience has provided us. I want to know, how can we teach our kids good, healthy mental preparation? Let's start with that.
Great question. And I want to preface this by just noting, when we say kids, the age can obviously be very drastic, from like really young to maybe teenagers. I'm not sure like what was the intention from the person who asked the question, basically. But at a young age, my emphasis is just let them have fun. Like, they're kids, you want them to enjoy the sport. And if you start to add things in that are going to make it feel like work and make it a little less fun, it can become a bit of a challenge for younger athletes in that context. However, coming from like a pro athlete perspective, looking back, what advice would I have liked? It's also difficult to say, but like, the one thing I always come back to is like, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail, which holds true in so many different areas of life, I think. But if we're talking, okay, like say, for example, this is a kid or like a young adult who is maybe 15, 16. Well, okay, at that point, mental preparation does become more important depending on what their goals are. So if they have goals to be reaching like the highest levels of their sport, it's of course important to have the fun aspect and to keep enjoying the sport itself. But how is it that we can become better athletes? And so the mental preparation, it becomes, of course, important at that point. So it's really crucial to kind of hone in on how your athletes are choosing to prepare, whether it's for practice or for games. And it is a choice. You have to choose if this is something you want to do. But basically, mental preparation is just preparing your mind and your body for success, for what's about to come in the next hour or 2 hours, depending on practice or a game. And when I talk to my athletes about mentally preparing, it doesn't have to be the same way for everyone. I feel like that's a common misconception, is like, well, if I'm going to be prepared, then I have to be like really dialed in and focused and just like not talking to people. And sure, that works for some people. I can also testify that I have a lot of teammates who were like running around screaming and yelling and being absolute buffoons when I was playing. And I would look over at them and I'm thinking, how can you be focused right now? Like, I personally can't relate to that, because that's not how I prepare. However, I prepare differently for practices than I do for games. practice, super lighthearted. Like I like to have fun a lot more. I like to talk a lot more. But of course, like when I step on the ice, like it's game time. Like you play how you practice. So of course that's something that I would kind of alter as getting onto the ice. But for games, I don't talk to people. I do my own thing. Goalies are really weird. So of course, like it's just like different routines altogether. But basically, like how you prepare is going to set the tone for what's coming afterwards. And so part of that is figuring out how it is that you want to be feeling before getting into that. So if you know that, hey, I play at my best when I'm having fun and I'm loose before the game and I'm just enjoying myself, then that's how you mentally prepare. You just enjoy. Other people know that if I'm like, for me, if I'm chatting to everybody before a game and I'm like smiling, having a great time and like not focusing on what it is that I need to be doing, oftentimes that would reflect poorly in my performance. So yeah, I mean, the issue with the mental side of the game, I think, and it's not an issue per se, but it's very individual. So it requires a very high level of self-awareness from athletes to be able to figure out what is going to work best for them, because what works well for me is not going to work well for this person here. And that's just a fact.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think especially when it comes, I mean, it's really all sports, but especially it feels like with hockey, you have the pregame rituals. You have, you have to make sure that before the game, you tape your stick in a specific way. You have your headphones on, you're like dialed in. And I think it's unique to be able to think about the fact that everyone could have, like, you don't have to do those, I don't want to call them stereotypical things, but like the very stereotypical things that that athletes do, the very typical things that they do in terms of how they prepare. You can be very individual, and I think that is one of the many benefits to having a mental performance coach, is to be able to recognize that you don't have to do those things that you see all of your peers doing, because like you said, it's very unique to the individual, right? It's very individualism when it comes to that kind of thing, where we all prepare differently, not just for a hockey game or a sporting event, if you will, if we want to make it a little bit more broad, but we also prepare differently. Like, I have to go to work tomorrow. How am I going to prepare? Is going to be different than how you'll prepare to go to work tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love about the mental training with athletes in particular, is because everything that I teach my athletes is transferable to every other area of life. You just have to adjust and adapt it. That's the only difference. And to your point about, people having like specific rituals before going out on the ice and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I would prefer them to be routines rather than them to look at it as like, if I don't do this, then I'm going to play bad, right? There's a very big difference between, I don't know why I'm having a hard time finding the word, but like routine and, it starts with an S. I can't remember it. This is craziness. Because I don't have like this. I wasn't the kind of person who would like, I have to put my left sock on before my right sock. Like, I wasn't that type of athlete. For sure, if I was playing a game, I had a routine. So I would tape my stick when I first got to the rink. I would then go and get changed for like pre-warm up. I would have some ball works where I'm like juggling against the wall and stuff. I'd have some foam rolling and some stretching mixed into that. And then I'd go and have warm up with the team and then just mind my business and get changed. But some people, like if they accidentally put the right sock on instead of a left first, they're like, oh, like I have to take my sock off and put my other one on first, because if I don't, then like I'm not going to play well today. That's just holding you back. Like that right there, mentally, no, you got to find a different way to look at it.
And we will be right back.
This episode is sponsored by sports nutritionist Melissa Buffunos of MB Performance Nutrition. As a former competitive hockey player turned nutritionist, Melissa's mission is to help the next generation of hockey players optimize their health and diets so they can perform their best on and off the ice. Ready to dominate on the ice? Melissa's new course, The Hockey Nutrition Blueprint, is opening soon. If you're serious about learning how nutrition can impact performance and building actionable nutrition strategies based on your unique needs as an elite hockey player, get on the waitlist today. Learn more and sign up at melissabufunos.com/course. That's MELISSABOUFOUNOS.com/course. Thank you to Melissa Bufunos for sponsoring this episode.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah, and again, that's exactly why it's important for us to be highlighting, someone like yourself who is able to help reframe those perspectives and reframe those perceptions that you have to do those things. Like, you can just, like, it doesn't have to be a ritual. It can just be part of your process, your game day, how do you prepare for your game day? That's like such a much more like lighter approach to it. When you just say like, hey, this is how I prepare. It's like, it's not a ritual. I don't need to do it. It just helps me. And that's okay. So I think, that kind of segues a little bit, that sort of pressure that you put on yourself is kind of a good segue into this next topic, which is all about how athletes, especially when we talk about women's hockey, now more than ever, how athletes handle the pressure of being a role model for the younger or the next generation.
Also a great question. And I think I first would, before getting into like the specific answer here, I think it's also important to talk like about pressure in and of itself, because pressure gets a bad rap a lot of the time. When you think of pressure, a lot of people think to like this feeling of like tightness in the chest and like kind of like increased heart rate and breathing and these types of things, and maybe some more tension in the body. But pressure is not inherently good nor inherently bad. Ultimately, what it comes down to is how you are perceiving the upcoming event. So let's say, for example, we're talking about like performance pressure for games, right? How you are looking at this event and the meaning that you are giving it is what is causing you to feel either positive or negative pressure, because there is a difference. It can be good or it can be bad depending on how you are relating to it. And I did a little bit of prep for this, and I'm pulling from like my favorite book of all time to kind of share a little bit of insight on like pressure in and of itself. So I'm just going to quickly read a couple pieces here, but it says the human body reacts to pressure and stress. The heart beats faster and the breathing quickens. No one is immune. Jack Nicklaus, who has won more major championships than any golfer in history, says pressure creates tension, and when you're tense, you want to get your task over and done with as fast as possible. The more you hurry in golf, the worse you probably will play, which leads to even heavier pressure and greater tension. And there's a tennis star, Arthur Ashe, who says, we have a natural tendency to invest more energy when we're under pressure, but when tension rises, two things happen. The feet can't move and the diaphragm collapses. It's automatic and it's in the genetic code. So the reason I bring this up is because it's, again, also how you're relating to the situation too. So if you're looking at this like a high pressure situation and you're saying like, well, if I don't win, or if I don't do this well, or if I don't have these stats, then like these are the consequences that are going to happen as a result. You're already looking at this through a very negative lens, because you're looking at the consequences if you're not doing something. But if you're looking at this as an opportunity, as like a challenge, rather than kind of looking at it from like a fearful perspective, all of a sudden that changes. You're like, this is an opportunity for us to like win. This is an opportunity for me to contribute to the team. This is an opportunity for me to, improve in this area, for example. And so I feel like, again, pressure gets a really bad rap, but it also comes back to how you relate to said pressure.
Profound answers. So I think what I'm hearing here is that, and again, this is absolutely highlighting the importance of a coach such as yourself, where it's all about reframing that, right? So sure, admittedly, absolutely, especially now, especially for women's hockey players, there probably is a little bit more pressure on them, admittedly, because this is the biggest stage now with the professional league. This is there is a little bit there could be rather a lot more pressure on them to be able to, now they're being seen, now they're being followed, all that sort of stuff. But it's about how you reframe it. So it's not pressure, it's just an opportunity. And immediately I said that and I was like, oh, I'm not even a hockey player and I feel better just thinking about it like that. So I think that's a huge takeaway. And I think that absolutely answers that question around, there are athletes out there who are going to probably feel pressure, but there are also those athletes out there who recognize that it isn't pressure. It's just an opportunity, first and foremost, to go out there and just be yourself, but also an opportunity to be able to help the next generation of hockey players. And it's all about that opportunity.
You took the words right out of my mouth there. Is like, especially in women's hockey, I feel like there's just been so much lead up to this point where we've been fighting for so long to have a professional league, and now all of these amazing players are having an opportunity to really be role models for the next generation. And I don't think that they see that as a pressure thing. I think that they look at that as a privilege. And that's certainly how I do as a retired athlete, how I also would look at it if I was still playing too. Because at the end of the day, we want to make this a more sustainable future for the next generation and the one after that and after that. Because this is what we've been working so hard for so long, it seems, and going from CW to the NW to now the PHF, and now we have the PWHL. And I think, it's so great to finally have a product in which now we can start to truly see the growth of the sport. And we've already seen so much from January up until now, and there's so much more to come. But for sure, I think everybody in this space is looking at this as a privilege rather than like a pressure situation. And for those who are looking at it as a pressure situation, which I'm sure that maybe there are some people, try to reframe your perspective on this and think of the positive impact that you're having on the people who are watching you, the young girls who can now actually have a reason to dream about becoming a professional women's hockey player. Like, that is huge. And I have chills like thinking about this already. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I have chills as well. And every time we have a chance to talk about the growth of this game, the opportunity that these players finally have, next generation, all that sort of stuff. It's a long time coming, and if it doesn't give you chills, then I don't know. There's something going on, because this is an incredible moment right now, and an incredible movement. And I think, there's I guess there's no easy way to transition to this next question, but I want to know a little bit more about, I think there's an old guard who was, when we're talking about coaching, which is, you got to do this better, you got to do that better. Why did you do this? You made that mistake. Let's watch tape and go through all of your mistakes in a game. And I think we're slowly, hopefully not as slowly as I presume, moving towards or transitioning towards more of that positive reinforcement, where it's like, hey, listen, these are some of your obstacles, but let's talk about what you did really well in that game and let's build upon that. What do you think, what is the best way to treat the team and players to help them to break out of those slumps and to maintain that consistency, whether obviously it's on the ice, but also, to your career mentally?
Yeah, I love this question. And I actually first want to start out by just clarifying the difference between positive and negative reinforcement, because this is something that is confused by everybody all the time. And it's an honest mistake, because it's in the name. Like, you hear positive and you think that it's a good thing, and it's not quite how it works. So positive reinforcement is basically an attempt to influence someone's behavior by adding something unpleasant. So, for example, say if you're in practice, sometimes coaches do this. I even do this with some of my athletes just because it's enjoyable. They also enjoy it too, so it's not as unpleasant as like I'm making it out to be. But say, for example, like if we have a drill in practice and I say, okay, if you don't at least hit the goalie or hit the net, like if you're missing wide, you have to do like 3 push-ups or something like this, right? Like that's like a positive reinforcement because you're adding something that's unpleasant for them not doing what it is that you're looking for them to do. So you're trying to change the outcome by adding something that's not really enjoyable. Or you can say like bag skating or something like this. I don't know. That's really not enjoyable. But anyway, whereas we look at negative reinforcement, this is an attempt to influence behavior by taking away something unpleasant. So what you're ultimately doing is saying like, okay, like say for example, you win on the weekend. All right, well, we're not going to have to bag skate on Monday now because we had a win. Like that's negative reinforcement. It's really confusing because like it's, you know what I mean?
Mm.
It's a very common misconception. So with the definitions of like what each is, I want to also try to understand the question here because you asked like when a player or a team is going through a losing streak, how does negative reinforcement like impact that? Like should a coach be using negative reinforcement? So in this instance, if we're going by like definition, like taking away unpleasant things when you're in a losing streak, not sure if that's what like the purpose of the question was. So maybe you can clarify here.
Yeah, it's and that's valid, and I think that it's easy for again the old guard would say, "Hey, we're in a losing streak. I'm gonna make you bag skate every day."
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, "Hey, we're in a losing streak. Instead of doing a bag skate, let's actually give you the day off to kind of like recharge, to kind of maybe we'll just do a video. Maybe it's just we'll just go into the video room and we'll just watch video about how, as a team, not as Chris or not as Taylor, impacted the game in a negative way." I think is kind of where that question is going, and I think that it's really interesting to discuss like how, from that kind of perspective. So and whether you want to go positive or negative in this, how that approach can impact someone to be able to, hey, I had a garbage game last night. Is it better to get that negative reinforcement, I guess, if we want to call it reinforcement, although I don't know that's necessary, negative feedback, or do I want to actually gain positive feedback about the things that I did well, so that I can build upon that? I think we use the reinforcement word, and I think reinforcement is really just it's a more old school term for just feedback. Like, what is positive, negative feedback, and how does that impact your game?
Yeah. So when we're talking about feedback rather than reinforcement, I think that changes the entire tone of the question. And so I'm going to go ahead and say like it's going to be significantly better for your athletes and your team if you come at this from a positive approach. So providing constructive feedback. I don't want to call it positive feedback because if you're only looking at the positives and you're kind of like avoiding looking at what's not going well, that's not going to be helpful for anybody either, because then you're just fueling the same things that you're already getting at this point. So constructive feedback is where coaches should be going with things. And I understand because I'm like also dating a coach too. I know like what that mindset's like. And so I can see from like the outside looking in, a lot of the times coaches will first see like the negative things that are going on. And like, to be fair, I mean, it's a lot easier for you to point out what's not going well than it is for you to like double down on the things that are actually really going well at this point. And so constructive feedback is definitely where I would start from. And of course, again, this is all individual based on like what factors are going into like your team. Like having a team approach to this becomes a little bit more complicated because there's so many different factors that create these dynamics within a team that you have to be aware of, especially as a coach. So if I look at this just from like an individual player's perspective, I'm very much like an athlete-centered coach when it comes to anything in terms of athlete development. Because the best way to get the most out of your players is to meet them where they're at. So when I say this, I mean, like, you can't just drill sergeant them. Like you said, the old guard would just like say, this is not going well. This needs to be improved, and then like send you on your merry way. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's the best way to get through to just anyone in general, but also this generation as well. I feel a little bit like, I want to say they've been a little bit coddled to a certain extent. They're pretty sensitive, which is nothing against them at all. I think if they use that to their advantage, it's wonderful. And it's great to be in touch with like the emotional side of things as well. However, tough times are going to happen. And if we're not preparing our athletes to be able to deal with that type of adversity, then I think it becomes a liability at that point. But to go back to your question, constructive feedback from a coach to an individual player, meeting them where they're at, saying, hey, I've noticed that you're doing really well in, 1, 2, 3, like whatever you are noticing as a coach that's going well, and letting them know that, because it lets like the athlete know that you see them. You actually see them as an athlete, because a lot of players, they're like, oh, this coach plays favorites and like I'm not a favorite, so I already know like I'm not going to get the ice time or whatever it is. It happens all the time. And I hope that that changes moving forward from a coach's perspective. But starting out with the positive things, with what's going well, and then leading into saying, okay, here are some things that I think could use a little bit more work. And leaving them with, okay, maybe it's like the self-accountability. Maybe it's, following through on these things or whatever it is. But it's talking with them about the strengths, the weaknesses. Here's the area for improvement. And okay, how can I like support you more in getting better in some of these areas? Like, what would you like to see from me? And I think the coach athlete relationship now is evolving to a point where like coaches should also be asking for feedback from players too at certain points to see, okay, like also where can I be improving as a coach? Like, how can I support you more in improving some of these things, So, I mean, short answer is constructive feedback. Long answer is everything that I just went through.
And we'll be right back.
I would like to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook. Bet the action on the ice with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app now and use code THPN. New customers can get $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5 on hockey. That's code THPN, only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. The crown is yours. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. Please play responsibly. See dkng.com/hockey for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gambling resources. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. Copyright NHL 2023, all rights reserved.
And now, back to the show.
As you were sharing that, I immediately thought that really it's just about, and I think constructive feedback is absolutely a great way to encompass both positive and negative, because it doesn't, you hear, I'm going to give you negative feedback and you already cringe and you're already like, there's a wall, you kind of like freeze up, because no one, let's be honest, there are very few people out there that enjoy hearing negative feedback about themselves. So I think constructive is absolutely a great way, but really that's just like any relationship in your entire life, right? Like you want to know like, hey, listen, like this is what I saw. This is how I felt, but I also want to know what did you see? How are you feeling? And I think that collaboration is what will draw, especially in this space, an athlete to a coach and a coach to an athlete, and will ultimately get the most out of that athlete because that athlete actually believes that that coach is there not to just tell them, okay, these are our systems, this is our structure, these are our drills, go do them, don't talk to me. It's all about that collaboration, and that's how you
Mhm.
build that trust, and that's how you build that incredible relationship, which will help not just the team but also you as an athlete, and let's be honest, the coach as well.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. Like, trust is truly the foundation in all of those relationships. So if you want to have a functional team, everybody has to be able to trust one another. If you want to have great relationship between you and your athletes, the trust goes both ways. Like, you can't just like expect your athletes to blatantly trust you because you're the coach, but you have to give them the reason to as well, and vice versa. Like, athletes, you can't just expect your coach to throw you out there because, oh well, I'm a top scorer and that's it. Like, no, that's not it. You have to also build that trust with your coach too, to know that they can trust you to go out and do your job, even if you're in a scoring slump, for example. Like, they need to know that you're like a full round player. And if not, then your coach is going to help you to start seeing some of those things where maybe you are lacking a little bit more. And I know some people have a really hard time being open to that. And to what you had said earlier, like having the constructive and not just going into the negative from a psychological standpoint, specifically speaking, you start with positive things because it actually opens up the brain a little bit more. So when you're starting with that, you're already helping to make your athlete a little bit more open to what you're about to have a conversation about. And then when it comes to like more critical things, it's easier for them to basically take what it is that you're saying, take it all in, soak it in, and not be as defensive or on guard with things, because it's not just like, boom, I'm going to hit you with all this negative feedback. It's like, hey, we're going to have a conversation. This is what's great. This is what we can improve. Da, 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 da.
Fantastic. Couldn't agree more. As we slowly unwind here, or wind things up, or end things, couple of last questions for you.
Mhm.
We've spoken a little bit about how long a season can be, and someone asked, how do players, specifically from a mental perspective, deal with the ups and downs of a long season? Now, obviously, it's going to be different based on the sport, because obviously, baseball is 162 games as opposed to, PWHL, which is 24, depending on the league. Obviously, it's going to be very different, but sort of more broadly, how do you deal with the ups and downs? Because there are going to be wins, there are going to be losses, there are going to be win streaks, there are going to be losing streaks, all that sort of stuff. How do you continue to kind of grind through that, if you will?
Yeah, great question. All these questions have been great so far, honestly. So I call it like riding the wave. You have to be in the present moment. There's no other way to get around it, because if you're sitting here and okay, maybe you're in a high moment and you're thinking about like the future, then you're not having the ability to actually embrace everything that you're experiencing right now, first of all, which takes away from the experience of being an athlete, of no matter what level you're at. But if you're also like in a slump right now, thinking about the future where you can't control anything is also not going to help you to get out of that slump either. And the seasons are long. So I kind of come back to like maintenance, more or less. You have to know your body. So like self-awareness, foundation piece right here, both mentally and physically, you need to know your body. And athletes physically usually can know what their body feels like and know like when something's right, when something's wrong. That's usually not the problem, but it's like mentally and emotionally, they have a really hard time figuring out like, okay, like is this okay? Is this normal? Like nobody else seems to be feeling this way. And especially like on the mental side, and this where like the mental health thing comes in, like having a great support system is going to be really crucial in those long seasons, especially if things aren't going your way, because it's great to have support. We're social beings. We want to feel community and feel belonging and feel value. So I think it's, again, important to have the foundation of self-awareness, both mentally and physically. And it takes time to build up like the mental self-awareness. So just being more aware of your thoughts, how you're talking to yourself, what emotions you're feeling, and like why those emotions are coming up. And just kind of just sitting in it, honestly. Like sometimes you just have to sit where you are and work through it. But in terms of like dealing with long seasons from a physical standpoint, like rest, recovery, of course, like making sure that you have proper hydration, nutrition, like all of those basic things I can talk about. But everything at the end of the day will come back to being in the present moment, having some mental strategies in place to help you stay centered and grounded in moments where things are getting tough. So for me, if I talk about myself, I come back to like my breath work and actually being able to lay down, put the phone away, no distractions, and just lay there and focus on my breathing. And also focusing on like doing like a body scan, basically from head to toe, like how am I feeling? Also visualizing some of that like stress and pain leaving my body. And maybe I'm a weird goalie, I don't know, but I find it to be the most helpful thing ever, because when you're just sitting in the present moment, focusing on the things that you can control, which is you, and your breathing is something you can control literally any time of day, it just brings you and centers you to right now and helps you to kind of get through that moment a little bit more. So that's how I would go with it. But again, every athlete is very individual.
No, but it's always great to be able to gain those individual perspectives, right? Because again, you've said it time and time again, it's important to be able to recognize that every athlete is an individual and everyone's going to have different perspectives. But it's also important on the flip side to maybe listen to some of those other perspectives, because maybe the perspective that you have has been actually holding you back, that you've been too hard on yourself, that you're not necessarily looking at things as a whole, like as one of the examples you shared, which was like doing a body scan. Maybe I've never done that because I never thought that that would be something that would benefit me. But to hear that as a perspective, as an approach to how maybe I can reset after a game, or how I can, set myself up for game day. Maybe that's a game day that becomes part of my new game day. I was going to say routine, ritual, don't want to do that, but like part of my game day process, right? Like I sit there and I just like think about like, how's my head doing? How are my shoulders feeling? How are my arms feeling? And doing a full body scan. It's those individual perspectives that absolutely lend themselves to how you can create your own new game day process, or game day, whatever, or post game, pre game, whatever it is, right? Like that's not even a game day. Maybe it's an off day, right? Like that's how you reset, right? So I love that perspective, and I think you've shared so many incredible perspectives. This is obviously something that's very, very near and dear to you. You are clearly passionate about it. You've been so eloquent in how you've shared your experiences, as well as how you approach this as a coach. I think that it's important now to kind of give you a little bit of a shout out and just be like, how can people connect with you? How can people talk to you? Like, what's the best way to get in touch with you, Taylor Cook?
Great question also. Yeah, and I'm pretty much available on all social media platforms, I'll say, except Twitter, which I'm hopefully going to fix with maybe a little bit of your help. But yeah, you can find me on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. You can send me an email. You can go to my website, taylor-minds.com. I'm super open, I can hope people can kind of gather that from this conversation. But yeah, I'm really eager to just talk with people about like what they're experiencing at the moment, and to hear like what it is that they have going on in their experience and what they're facing, to be able to help them overcome those things and provide like the tools and strategies where they can, from like here on out, say, okay, like I can revisit some of these things and I can start to use these and implement these and like work through whatever's coming up. So I have free discovery calls for anybody who has questions or wants to learn more, or maybe figure out if coaching is going to be the best route for them. But you can reach me pretty much anywhere. So that's.
And what is your handle, just for the listeners? What's your handle?
Yeah, it's at Taylor B Cook _. That's same on TikTok and Instagram.
Perfect. And absolutely a worthwhile follow. Please connect with her. Obviously, you've all witnessed today, an incredible resource when it comes to so many things, but in this case, mental performance. And there you have it. That was the very first episode of an ongoing series featuring Taylor Cook, which we hope will provide you with some additional tools to use to overcome mental hurdles in your game. For mental performance coach and former professional goalie, got to give you a little shout out there as well, Taylor Cook. I'm Chris Sinclair, and this has been the Rinkside Rundown podcast. Cheers.